Okay, let's begin with a prayer in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Saint Francis of Assisi, holy guardian angels, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, well, welcome to part 4 of Father Casey Presents Marriage Preparation for those who are not yet engaged or possibly not even dating. Today, we're talking about tough questions, and the idea behind this is to kind of throw all of the more difficult topics into just one talk, hopefully with the foundation that we've built upon with regard to what marriage is and why the church prepares people for marriage, and some elements of the virtue of chastity and why that's necessary, as well as dating and different points about dating. Today we're talking about some more of the tough questions. Now, they are tough questions, I don't think because they are difficult to answer. The responses to these questions are not in of themselves. Some of them are, but that they're tough more in the sense that they are the difficult answers to live, or the ones that people are more inclined to reject the answer if they don't like it. And so as a result, tough questions is more in that area. Now, I broke it into five different sections: sexual relations, procreation, social differences, background, and difficult breaks. Now, with all of these, here is the primary point I want to say. Every single one of these topics is easier to address like early on, right away, before it becomes too... Problems only have a way of spiraling and becoming worse and worse and worse, snowballing, where it just... it's much more difficult to stop something that's wrong than it is to not start it in the first place. So, sexual relations. Talk about premarital sex and how that relates to the whole picture of dating, or unfortunately nowadays, not dating. Most couples, not most, okay. In a worldly sense, a lot of couples are sexually intimate before they're even exclusive, right? So before there's been a DTR in whatever sense it is, there's already all forms of sexual activity, and that is kind of a normal part of the hookup culture and casual sex and all of that. I think it's important when we talk about these things from a Catholic perspective and with a Catholic worldview that we don't so much talk about premarital sex as we talk about sex outside of marriage, right? Any kind of sexual relations outside of marriage. Because in reality, there's not a huge difference between having sex with someone before you're married to someone else and having sex with someone you're not married to when you are married to someone else, right? It's all sex outside of marriage. And so basically what happens is premarital sex is the lived practice of it's okay to have sex with someone that you're not married to, right? And that is not the right foundation to found for a relationship, especially a relationship tending toward marriage. Oh, but there's commitment, there's love, there's all of that. Great. There are plenty of people who feel commitment and love to somebody that they're not married to when they're married to someone else. But we would still say there shouldn't be a sexual relationship there. And even that commitment, that love is something that's already crossed emotional boundaries. Sex outside of marriage is a violation of the very meaning of sexual love and sexual intercourse, in that all sexual love is tied into the marriage vows, the promises that a couple speaks to each other in their marriage, and that the sexual intercourse is only what's said in the vows expressed in the language of the body, right? So it's the language of the body ratifying or consummating the language of the vows. And so the two are always seen together, which is why a couple, after they get married, go through the marriage ceremony. You know, many people don't know this, a marriage is not indissoluble until it's been consummated. So an unconsummated marriage is still breakable. And that even if you've gone through the church and you've done the whole church wedding and the whole thing, if the marriage is never consummated, it is dissolvable. And so it's interesting that we see, and it's just part of the law of the church, it's part of our lived experience, that there's a relationship between marriage and the marriage vows in particular and sexual relations. And that is a very normal thing. That's just part and parcel with marriage. I was starting to listen to the audiobook, and I got to go back and finish it, called What is Marriage? By a few authors. I think they're out of New Jersey. I know Robbie George is one of them. I can't remember the names of the other authors, but What is Marriage? And it talks about the conjugal view of marriage, which has a deep relationship between sexual intimacy and particularly sexual intercourse between a man and a woman, ordered toward procreation, which we're going to get to as point number 2, and marriage. In the marriage vows, a couple promises, they promise to love each other freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully. Freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully, right? And that those 4 aspects of marriage, that love between a couple in marriage is going to be free, full, faithful, and fruitful, are also the 4 aspects of what the language of the body speaks in the very act of sexual intercourse. That all sexual relations are meant to be free, they're meant to be full, engaging the totality of the person. They're meant to be faithful, meaning exclusive, and they're meant to be fruitful, tending toward new life. And so the 2 are so related. So as a result, it's basically a lie. With the language of premarital sex or extramarital sex in any way is a lie with the language of the body, that with sexual relations outside of marriage, the body is lying, and that it's saying something that has not been spoken vocally, and is not the reality. That this relationship is not a ratified, free, full, faithful, and fruitful. And so to have any sexual relations outside of marriage, it's the language of the body saying something that's not been said publicly and ratified and witnessed and committed to, right? Because the civil institution of marriage is meant that you say this not just in secret. We're not allowed to do. I think we talked about that a little bit with the church preparing people for marriage and all that we're not allowed to do clandestine marriages. We're not allowed to do marriages that are not recognized by the state. And so as a result, marriage is meant to be public. It's a public thing. It's supposed to be open to the public, and it's supposed to be announced, and it's recognized by the state. And that we two people commit to one another, to love each other in a free, full, faithful, and fruitful way. And they do that publicly, and it's acknowledged by the state and by the church in civil and religious ceremonies. And then that love is expressed in the language of the body through sexual intercourse. So sexual intercourse outside of marriage, or any sexual activities outside of marriage, it's a lie with the language of the body. And with this, 100%, I'll say, this is one of those things that it is much harder to fix this after it's happened, right? It's much harder for a couple which has already crossed those lines to scale back. It's possible. It's totally possible, but it's so much harder, right? If there's a lack of observing of boundaries in relationships, then this is one of those things that it's so much easier and more livable if it is not if you're not trying to convince people to stop an action, but rather no, just this is meant to be in this proper context. Same way, it's easier for someone to not start having an affair than it is for them to break it off, right? It's so much harder once boundaries have been crossed to break that off. And it's much easier to say look, just don't start down that path. And that's really with any kind of sin. Okay. Point number 2, under sexual relations, we're going to look at a lot of these from 2 sides, right? So there's sexual relations outside of marriage. Flip side, tough questions. You know what's a good book for this, even though it may it's good. I think it's a necessary book. Christopher West's Good News on Sex and Marriage has some points in it that maybe I wouldn't agree with 100%, but it's very good. And it's just like someone needs to do question and answer. And Christopher West is a good man. He understands the faith, and he does offer just good answers. So Christopher West's Good News on Sex and Marriage covers a lot of the things I'll be talking about today. One of the things is impotence, right? So this is on the flip side of sexual relations. There's couples being sexually active before marriage. There's the flip side of couples that are not able to engage in sexual intercourse for one reason or another. And that impotence is that's prohibitive of marriage, right? Because it's so related. So if a couple's unable to have sexual relations with each other, they are not able to get married to each other, right? One of the questions I have to ask couples before they get married is, are you aware of any physical defect that will prevent you from having marriage relations? And so, this actually happens, unfortunately, with a lot of our service, particularly our servicemen, who suffer some kind of major injury in service to our country, in wartime zones or anything like that, and are no longer able to have normal sexual relations. You can't get married if you can't be sexually active, right? So it doesn't mean you have to be able to actually have children. It's not a matter of fertility. It's a matter of actually having sexual relations. And so that's another kind of tough question, because that cross, that burden, and oftentimes through no fault of one's own, is prohibitive of getting married. And so those who suffer in one way or another are unable and would be unable of having sexual relations, are unable to get married because of the intrinsic link between marriage and sexual activity. And then the other big point on this one, and this is one of the big points that comes up in all marriage preparation, is cohabitation. Living together before you get married. We assume, it's just a normal assumption, that people that live together, that are romantically interested in each other and are living together, are sexually active. That is a normal societal thing, right? You just assume people that are romantically interested or in a relationship and are living together are sexually active. Living together is what would be the societal sign normally, until more recently. It would be the living together that would be the major societal change that would be like, oh, these people are married, right? Two people who are obviously in a relationship move in next door. You assume we used to assume that they're married. Nowadays, you don't really know. But normally it would be that you would assume that these people are married. And you would assume two people in a relationship, living together, are sexually active. Part of this is just pure common sense, right? If you're sleeping in the same bed as someone, there's been, not to me, but there are priests who have said that they'll go through this whole thing, you shouldn't live together, you shouldn't be, it's like, oh no, Father, like, don't worry. Yeah, we live together, yeah, we share a bed, but no, there's no sexual activity going on. It's like, are you kidding? Like, that's a problem, right? If you're sleeping in the same bed as someone that you're in a relationship with, and there's no threat or temptation of sexual activity, like, you're probably marrying the wrong person at that point. There's a problem there, right? The normal sexual attraction that occurs and grows over time in a relationship and deepens in a relationship, it's not fitting. It wouldn't be good if that wasn't there. As a result, living together is something that needs to be, can't happen before a couple is married. Now, it does happen a lot of times, and this is another one of those things where it's a lot easier to not move in together than it is for a priest to come along for marriage preparation and say, yeah, one of you has to move out, which oftentimes you can't legitimately do. Like, that's a very hard conversation to have, and I don't know any couples where that has been a easily attainable goal. That, yeah, you have to move out, you got to stop living together, and that somehow you're able to do that. That somehow it is that you are financially, or like you're going to be married in 3 or 4 months or 6 months, and you're not able to get a year-long lease somewhere, and all the. It's just don't open up that can of worms, right? And living together before marriage is, it's at best, it's an occasion of sin, right? At absolute best, it's the occasion of sin. And I would say this would even be true of couples that live together, but they live, maybe there's like 4 people living there. Like, it just the amount of time that could be, or 6 people, or living with your fiance's family could be a doable thing, provided separate rooms. But even in some of those cases, there's a very healthy thing to preventing premarital relations if someone has to get in a car and go home at the end of the night, or has to drive back the next day at some point. Like, having a physical distance is helpful in preventing any kind of boundary crossing, especially if a couple is trying to live chastely and they're trying to live within proper boundaries. Not living together is important. And that as well, because there's also the areas of shared life that are just, it's better that that level of more than just sexual intimacy, but just normal intimacy of just living, the living together. It's like those are certain things that it's better for that to be in the context of marriage. The way that we're less guarded usually at home, that it's more we're just kind of at home, we're more just ourselves. That's something that it's only after we've committed to somebody and they've committed to us that we should feel free to kind of start a household and learn that shared life. And until then, that person is just someone I'm not married to. And so to have that level of familiarity that comes with living together is, even in not just the sexual way, is something that's better to save that for marriage. And then really save it for marriage. And so that there's a beauty that happens. I remember talking to someone, I'm not going to say who, that this was a couple that was living together before they got married. And then I remember I was all excited when they did get married, and I went and I was talking to them, like, "You're married, how's it going?" It was not a marriage that I celebrated. And I'm like, "You're married, how great, like, wow." And this was only like 3 weeks after they got married. And they're just like, "Yeah, nothing really changed." And I'm like, nothing really changed? Are you kidding me? Like, nothing changed? Good luck living that for the rest of your life, right? Like, it's like something has to change. And the more that changes, that then is a sign of the change of state in your life, the better it will be for actually living this out, right? If you never lived with your spouse before you got married, then there is something that comes with, like, okay, this is new and I have to be willing to change and adapt. And we don't kind of practice that aspect of fully living with another person in that way beforehand. It's not something that needs practicing. It's that you make a commitment and then you live it out. A little bit of a funny story. I save this for next week. No, I'm going to tell you now, just because I want to. But it really applies more to next week's topic. But I want to share it anyway. Because this is even how much society has changed. Richard John Newhouse was a Catholic priest and founder of First Things magazine. He was a convert. He was Lutheran, growing up in a Lutheran pastor. And then he converted. And his mom and dad, they were married for like 60 years or something. So depending on age-wise, this is probably the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, the point is, Richard John, probably early 1900s or, 1920, whatever. Richard John Newhouse's parents, whenever it was. His dad had like a big crush on his mom. His mom wasn't that interested, but then slowly kind of, was interested. And then decided to go out to New York to visit. And his dad picks up his mom. This was going to be like their second date or something. And he said when he picked her up at the airport, so they're airplanes, so there'd have to be sometime when there was airplane travel. He said, I hope you brought a nice dress, because just got a call, they had a scheduling mix-up, and we're going to have to share a room, so we have to go get married before going to this party, right? And it's like, what a different world. And that was it, like that, and they got married, and they shared the room, and they were married for like 60-something years, right? And it's just like, I hope you brought it. We're going to have to, there's a scheduling mix-up, we're going to have to share a room, so we're going to get married on the way there. They were all ready through the letters they exchanged. This was going to happen eventually, but it was like, okay, this thought of like, we need a long engagement and to be dating forever. Like, marriage is a commitment. It's I am agreeing to be faithful to you and exclusive in my relationship with you for the rest of my life and the rest of your life. And so let's just do it, right? And they did. And so different view on marriage there. But they're just, you wouldn't share a room with someone in a guest house unless you were married to them, right? Of the opposite gender, obviously, right? So just cohabitation. Great, good. All right, like 5 minutes left and 4 more topics. Let's talk a little bit about contraception. So procreation, that sex leads to babies, and that sexual activity is reproductive in its very nature. And so the fact that sexual activity and sexual intercourse is related to the creation of new life is it's written into nature, and that this is something, it's actually, so contraception, what contraception is to through any direct action before, during, or after sexual intercourse to directly seek to sterilize that otherwise potentially fertile action, right? So it's any action on the part of the couple, either before, during, or after, to intentionally sterilize the sexual act. And so that is contraception. It breaks the very nature of sexual intercourse, right? Sexual intercourse is meant to be both unitive and procreative. And so we have a little bit of moral theology. There are sins against reason, and then there are sins against nature. A sin against reason is a sin that is, it could be right at a different time, but it's not right here and now. Sexual intercourse with someone of the opposite sex outside of marriage is a sin against reason. Meaning, if you were married to that person, doing the exact same thing would be okay, but you're not married to them. It's a sin against reason, right? Much less difficult example. Eating meat on a Friday in Lent is a sin against reason, because you could do the exact same thing on a different day of the week and it would be fine. It's a sin against reason. Sins against nature are sins that break the very integral nature of the action, and therefore they could never be right in any time and place. This has broken the nature of what I'm supposed to do. Intentionally eating poison that I know will kill me is a sin against nature, provided that poison is not some kind of food that would nourish someone else, because then it would just be like, but like, no, to like drink a bottle of arsenic is a sin against nature. Because, is arsenic a liquid or powder? I don't know. It's a powder? All right, so our chemist tells us it's a powder. So anyway, whatever it is, to intentionally ingest arsenic, it breaks the very nature of nourishment, which is to give me life and health, right? And so it's a sin against nature, and it'll end up leading to my death. The nature of sexual intercourse is both unitive and procreative. And so sins against nature are those that break one or another of those actions. And so any use of the reproductive parts in a way that does not tend toward procreation is a sin against nature, because it's breaking the very nature of what those parts of our bodies were meant for. Part of that is it's a sin against nature to contracept, because it is breaking the very nature, it's blocking in many ways the very nature of of what this was meant for and what our human sexuality was meant for. So contraception, before, during, or after. Now this is one of those ones that is going to, so again, because the sin against nature, if a couple is not only having sex outside of marriage, but they're contracepting, one of those gets fixed when they get married, the other one doesn't, right? And so this is one of those ones that needs to be addressed ahead of time. And it requires everything that we've talked about with proper boundaries and this is where you need marital chastity, because to not contracept doesn't mean that you end up having a child every 11 months or 12 months, but rather it means that you need to have good chastity and self-mastery in there, temperance, and understand how it's not possible for a couple to conceive in every day of their married life. And so natural family planning is what the church recommends if couples want to space births for legitimate reasons. Just reasons, I think, it used to be grave, now it's just, is the terminology that we use. But to space births for just reasons is that it is, to use natural family planning is to learn the signs and symptoms of fertility and to use that information in order to determine whether a couple should be sexually active right now or not, should engage in sexual intercourse or not, knowing that a child probably will result from this. So that natural family planning is to learn that. Now, many people want to say, isn't natural family planning just Catholic contraception? And it's not. We could do a whole nother we may do a whole nother Saturday series on some of these topics. And one of them is that NFP, natural family planning, is not just Catholic contraception, because contraception is to take an intentional action against procreation. Whereas natural family planning, you never sin, usually you don't sin through inaction, right? So it's not like by inaction you're sinning. Sometimes you do. There is an aspect of the marriage debt that we could talk about. Basically, couples that refuse sexual relations to their spouse for unjust reasons, or just because no, or punishment, even worse. That is, now again, there's a reasonable expectation of sexual activity within marriage. And so there is a way that there could be a different type of sin through just refusing that sexual activity within marriage for a prolonged period of time, not for reasons of health or anything like that. Okay, that's a whole nother topic we could get into too. Because we're already at 10:30 and I'm already over time and we've only gone through 2 points. But contraception, you don't sin through not having sex. Whereas if you're doing natural family planning, whereas contraception is that it's specifically trying to manipulate or control the sexual act, which is breaks the very nature of it. Okay. Under this topic as well, contraception, we need to talk on the flip side about the reality of infertility, and that there are a lot of couples that struggle with infertility, and that this is a conversation that needs to come up usually before marriage, that it's not kind of a given that a couple is going to be able to procreate. And so that conversation needs to come up. There is... So with regard to, but infertility doesn't, unlike impotence, infertility doesn't invalidate the marriage. So people can still get validly married even if they are infertile, if they're not able to have children. As long as they're able to have a completed sexual act, they can still get married. And so infertility is it's a cross. It's a real burden, and people need to learn about it. And all people should learn about it before they get married. And so they should know the causes of infertility, some of the treatments for infertility itself. So the church is against artificial means of procreation and conception. So we're against in vitro fertilization. Here, moral theology, very specific. Against the means, but that doesn't mean that the people who are created by those means are somehow bad, wicked, or evil. You can be for the person and against the means, right? It's actually the exact same case with regard to rape. Both of those are breaking the nature of the sexual act, right? Those are both sins against nature. But the children that would be produced by those means are in and of themselves good, right? Those are good people. They're good children, even if we say we are against the means of that, and the means never justify the end, right? So the ends never justify the means. So you can never say like, well, this is okay because look, the person's, no, the ends don't justify the means. So infertility, but that, there's something called NAPRO technology. I think it's fertilitycare.org is the website. Dr. Tom Hilger started it in Nebraska. And that's about learning the signs and learning the underlying causes of infertility. So what we'd say is learn the underlying causes of infertility, because there's a lot of couples where they've struggled with infertility, and instead of just paying the tens of thousands of dollars for in vitro fertilization and getting their 1 or 2 or 4 babies or whatever they wanted, they addressed the underlying causes of the infertility. And now I remember a friend of mine, they were struggling with infertility for a while, talked to one of these NAPRO doctors, I think it was, and worked on some of the underlying causes. And then I think now they're expecting baby number 4 sometime this year. And so there's something like, because it's achieving fertility, not just achieving the baby, right? We want the body to work in the way that it's supposed to work, and the systems of the body to work in the way they're supposed to work, and not just get the outcome we want. Okay, the third difficult thing with regard to procreation is what's called the intention against children. And this is basically if a couple this is something that invalidates the marriage. If a couple gets married and they have the intention, one or either the parties has the intention, we will never have children, that I do not want to have children. Usually this is achieved by means of contraception. It could just be achieved by means of never consummating the marriage. But if it's an intention against children, that we will not have children, that intention against children is a cause of invalidity. You get an annulment if that was the case. Or if you told me that before the marriage, I wouldn't be able to celebrate the wedding at all. If you have that firm intention to we will not have children, you can't get married. You have to have openness to children. Again, free, faithful, fruitful, free, full, faithful, and fruitful. That you have to promise in marriage that your love will be open to new life and the procreation of new life. Okay. 3 more big topics. Social differences. Wow, we're going to go way over today. All right, social differences. And 2 of these, mixed religion and family strife. What would I want to say about those? Mixed religion. I think it's okay. I said it was okay last week in dating. I would say that's still okay. It's okay to marry someone who's not Catholic. If you're Catholic, it's okay to marry someone who's not Catholic. That mixed religion may be a difficulty in your marriage. It may be something that you have to keep working through. The party that is Catholic has to agree. They actually have to sign a paper that we have saying that you agree to stay Catholic and that you'll raise your children Catholic. But that a mixed religion is not in and of itself an impediment. We have to be very careful when we talk about who you can't marry and who you can marry, right? You can't marry someone if both of you or one of you has an intention against children. That you can't get married. We can't go through with the ceremony. You can't marry someone that you are related to by 2 degrees in the vertical line or 4 degrees in the collateral line. You can marry your second cousin, basically, or your first cousin once removed, I think you can marry. You can't marry your first cousin. There's an actual priest talk. We had to study how far you can't marry anyone in your vertical line. And no, you're right, no one in your vertical line, right? Means you can't marry your parents or your children. No one in your vertical line. And then your collateral line, it's 4 degrees, unless the bishop gives you permission, then you could do 2 degrees. So 2 degrees would be from common ancestor, so you can't marry your sibling, obviously. You can't marry your niece or nephew, ever. You can marry your cousin, because the common ancestor then is a grandparent. So with the bishop's permission, you can marry a cousin. Anyway, we had to, if I do marriage preparation with a couple, I have to ask them if they're related to each other. And if they are, I have to fill out the chart of how related they are. I've never had to do that. And TBH, I've looked at all of the charts I've looked at all the books we have here at St. Francis, and no one has ever done that here in this church. So I did have a friend who had to, who married first cousins, and but he had to go to Jersey because everything's legal in Jersey. He had to go to Jersey to do it because it wasn't legal in the state where he lived. So where he was a priest. So anyway, why'd I get into that? Oh yeah, okay, here's why I went down that rabbit hole. Woo! You can't, mixed religion is not something like being related, right? You can get married to someone who's not Catholic. We have to be very careful when we say who you can and can't marry. Like, people like, Father, tell this person they can't marry this Protestant. It's like, but they can marry them. Should they is another question, but they can. And generally, if a person's a good God-fearing Protestant, it's better than a lapsed Catholic in many ways. And so some of my most virtuous and pious family members are the non-Catholics. And so there is something about being good and God-fearing in that way. So mixed religion, but it's something to talk about. It's something that's not an automatic deal breaker, but it is something that needs to be very honest, right? The way it is that you have to be willing, and the non-Catholic party has to be willing to support the Catholic party, but that doesn't just mean non-obstruction. What that means is actual support, right? If the way I know a good priest who used the example of, if your fiance or spouse, let's say your husband or wife, said that they wanted to go get their doctorate, right? They wanted to get their doctorate. What does supporting them look like? Does supporting them mean, well, I won't stop you as long as you keep doing everything else you're supposed to do, and I'm not going to help you even a little bit? No, what it means is when you have class, I'll watch the kids. When you need to, research, maybe I could even help you a little bit. It's working together in these ways. So supporting your spouse in their religion isn't just non-obstruction. It has to be an actual given support. And then family strife. So family strife is very bad when it happens, but it's something that does happen, which is that somebody in my family doesn't like my fiance, or doesn't like the person. Now, if they don't like the person you're dating, or they don't like your fiance, until you're married, generally listening to your family, if you have a good relationship with your family, like, they know you, and if they have your best interests at heart. Unfortunately, a lot of families don't have their children's best interest at heart, and there's a lot of brokenness there. But if your family does have your best interest in heart, listening to them if they don't like the person that you're dating can be a helpful thing. And I've seen that firsthand where, look, the parents know this isn't going to go, like, this isn't going to last, this isn't good for them, but it takes the person in the relationship a little while to figure that out, and sometimes it's even too late. So family strife, though, is when your family doesn't like someone, but it may be for bad reasons or for the wrong reasons. Your family doesn't like the person that you're dating, and you think that they're wrong and unjust in that. And so how do you deal with that? What I would say with regard to this is everything leading up to the marriage, you should try to be getting the most amount of opinions possible. But if you decide and have said that, like, no, this is a person that I love, that loves me, we're committed to loving each other, and we will be faithful to this relationship. The day you get married, your family becomes the person that you've married, and any children that are the result of that relationship. Meaning, and I've had this conversation with other people, where after they get married, what their in-laws, they don't like their in-laws, and there really develops a real kind of tension there in that relationship. And I had to say, and I've had to say in the past to families where this has happened, that, like, okay, but, like, if your parents don't like your spouse, you've only actually promised to be faithful to one of those, right? And so when you get married, you start a new family. And while you have to have due honor for your parents, if even they would be trying to break up something that you've committed to living, then there's no question about which side you have to pick. It's the one that you've sworn to be faithful to, namely marriage. So you have to honor your parents, but you do have to, and you should listen to good advice when it's given. So family strife requires a lot of internal examination of, am I being given good advice pre-marriage? Am I being giving good advice? And should I really listen to them? And it takes some difficult reckoning if, your family's opposed to the person that you're dating. This could happen in a lot of non-pious families and a lot of families where there's brokenness and you're dating someone who's virtuous, and that there is they don't like them because they see in them that they're going to, both of you are living contrary to how your family is living. And then you just need to say this is the person that I feel that we can together make each other saints and live a life of love and commitment. Family strife. Okay. The next two topics, background and difficult breaks. Background. The two things in background are family divorce and addictions. So it often happens that most times nowadays, one or both of the both of the parties getting married have divorce, if not in their immediate family, at least in their extended family, right? We don't know people that aren't related to people that are not related to people that are divorced, right? And a lot of times it's parents if it's not extended family. And with that, it's just important to recognize, unfortunately, there's an insecurity that could set in that if my parents couldn't live this faithfully, will I be able to live this faithfully? And there's a real insecurity that can set in there. It's just important to say, well, I'm different from my parents, and to not let the wounds of divorce, which are very real, they're very real wounds, to acknowledge them, and to be sure that the person that you are dating seriously or engaged to knows about them, and to be very honest about that. But that we are not bound. It was actually just in the Office of Readings today that no more will it be said, the parents have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. Meaning no longer, God is saying, we don't pay the penalty of our parents' sins, and that we shouldn't have to do that. And so this is from Ezekiel, right? And so it's whatever happens in the life of someone's parents that would cause the breakup of the marriage, we don't have to suffer the penalties of that in the same way, and that we don't have to be burdened by that. But that the wounds that have come from that are something we have to be open and honest about in our dating and engaged relationships, preparing for marriage. So when there is divorce in the family, that doesn't have to define your relationship. Right? Someone else's divorce doesn't define your relationship. Every relationship starts from scratch, and I tell every couple I work with for marriage prep that day one, the next wedding I'm going to celebrate is October 10th. So October 10th is day one for this family. It's blank slate, start from scratch. And so while we each come in with our baggage and our wounding, it's day one, start from scratch. And the same thing happens in the priesthood when if a priest has a priest mentor, someone they look up to and who really kind of inspires their vocation, and then that person leaves the priesthood. And it's this was a priest I looked up to and they left the priesthood. Am I going to be able, is the same thing going to happen to me? You are not defined by someone else's failures, and whether even those failures were their fault or not. And then addictions. Addictions in a similar way. Are there a wound that we come into marriage with, and they don't need to define us, but they need to be acknowledged ahead of time. They absolutely should not be hidden, and it just needs to be very, very well known, right? So that is addiction to alcohol, to drink, to drugs, and we've got to at least mention it, addiction to pornography. Porn is more addictive than cocaine from its first usage, and now the average age of exposure, I believe, it's being recorded, but we could go look it up. I think it's somewhere around the third or fourth grade with now technology. So we are basically given third and fourth graders something more addictive than cocaine from its first usage, right? And the world's going to turn out fine. There's a very good documentary I just watched 2 months ago called Brain Heart World, and it's all about the effects of pornography on the brain, on relationships, and on the world. It's very, very good. Porn is very addictive. And if one or both of the parties in a relationship have that addiction and are either actively striving to overcome it or are currently sober or clean from it, you would say, you never lose an addiction. An addiction is something you have for the rest of your life. Once those neural pathways have been forged in your brain, it never goes away, right? It's incredible to hear people in Alcoholics Anonymous who would say, like, hi, my name is James, I'm an alcoholic, but I have been sober for like 40 years. I haven't had a drink for 40 years. But I am an alcoholic, right? In Alcoholics Anonymous, each person introduces themselves. Hi, my name is whatever, I'm an alcoholic. Whether you've had a drink last week, or yesterday, or earlier today, or 40 years ago, you are an alcoholic, right? Addictions, they forge the networks in the brain. And so it's important to recognize that those never go away. And they are not, again, this is not something that prohibits marriage, but it's something that needs to be adequately addressed and needs to be known. And so the spouses can help each other through those things. And then the last thing, difficult breaks. The 2 points I want to talk about here are abuse and dependency, right? And with these, it's that these are the areas where this relationship needs to be broken, and it needs to be broken as soon as possible. Any kind of abuse in a relationship, there is no reason to try to talk around that or to justify or anything. In any relationship where there is abuse, whether it's physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, any relationship where there is abuse, that relationship needs to end. I would say that you never fix a relationship that has abuse, that is abusive. You never fix a abusive relationship. You end an abusive relationship, and you end it immediately, as soon as possible. With this, you need good friends and a good support network, people that you can talk to, that can encourage you, that can help you. It's important to not try to do these things alone. If you never fix an abusive relationship, if you were to have a future relationship with that person, it would have to be a new relationship after whatever they're going through in their life, they need to fix. But they need to fix it away from you, and that you need to be free from them. So you don't fix them if you're in a relationship with them, and you break the relationship. And so whatever's going on, it's not saying that there would never be a possibility for reconciliation, but it's not a fixing of the relationship. It has to be a stopping, a fixing of the problem, and then a possibility of a restarting, but even that I would strongly, strongly caution against. I think at a certain point when a relationship pre-marriage has been broken, it shouldn't be, like, we have no obligation to give someone a second chance. And so if that person acted in this way, then maybe they could marry and be happy with someone else. But I would say when that abuse has been present, it's just better to not be in a relationship. Like, if that person wants to marry someone else and you're able to marry someone else, it would be better for everyone involved to not try to even reconcile. There is my personal prudential advice. And then dependency is a similar way where a relationship needs to be broken, right? That we can't have a dependency upon the person that you marry. That limits freedom in the opposite way of abuse, where now this is just, I'm so dependent. That's not healthy for the person who is dependent. It's not healthy for the person who's dependent upon. So dependency needs to be a break in the relationship as well. And that needs, again, the support of good family and friends. And you need to do everything you can to be sure that the person who is being dependent, but Jason Everett said, it happens oftentimes in high school relationships, unfortunately, where it's like, if you break up with me, I'm going to kill myself. That's a hostage. He says that's not a relationship, that's a hostage situation, right? That person needs help, and it's not helpful for it to be that they're staying in a relationship with you, right? That's not helpful or healthy for them or for you. And so it needs to be, dependency as well as something where there needs to be a break in the relationship. Again, if there's fixing and healing that happens Well, there's the separation, great, but you don't fix a dependent relationship, you break it, and then if it were to restart in the future in a new context, then it would be, that would be how that would happen. Okay, so those are my difficult questions. We are 55 minutes into this, so here's what I'm going to say. We're going to say a prayer, cut the video, and then I'll take tough questions on the tough questions. Easy enough? I have a baptism at noon, and so I've got some time to hang out if we have tough questions on the tough questions. Great, but let's finish with the prayer. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. St. Francis of Assisi, holy guardian angels, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.